Hello, my name is Karen Hampton. Welcome to the first in the series of webinars, Moving Forward, Redefining the American Textile Conversation. I would first like to thank the Center for Craft for making this possible with a grant from the Craft Future Fund. And I'd also like to thank BRM Productions for everything technical. Today's webinar is Africa, America. My guests are Bukoka Koiki and Stephen Hamilton and Queen Allotey-Pappoe. What I'm gonna give a little bit of an introduction to the program, and then we're gonna hear from each one of the artists for about 5 to 10 minutes. And then I will join them for conversation and questions from the audience. My goal with Moving Forward is to bring little known and underrepresented voices to a broader audience. Early this summer, when Stephen Hamilton was a guest lecturer in my class at Massachusetts College of Art and Design, this idea was born. When Stephen and I started having a conversation and my students were privy to it, there was such excitement in the room that that the idea was born to produce a webinar to see if we could. And that's where the idea came from. After a lot of discussion, I decided, and I found out about the grant from the Craft Future Fund, I decided to make it 4 webinars and to have different guests for each in the series to discuss different issues in the textile field, as well as to bring underrepresented voices and have conversations. You know, there are no answers. Everything is new and brimming, and that's where this comes from. Bukoka Koiki is a Nigerian-American transdisciplinary artist whose work strives to collapse the single story of an immigrant experience by engaging and interpreting the liminal spaces she inhabits. Using an anthropological base research, she explores linguistic phenomena, cultural ontologies, generational memory, and more. Her artwork's been exhibited in galleries throughout the United States and is featured in American Craft Magazine, Surface Design Journal, and Art 21. Bukoka was a 2020 nominee for the Bradford Elliott Award from the Textile Society of America and was shortlisted for the 2019 Emerging Voices Award from the American Craft Council. She received her MFA in Applied Craft and Design from Pacific Northwest College and her BFA in Communications from the University of North Texas. My second artist is Stephen Hamilton. Stephen is an artist and educator living and working in Boston, Massachusetts. Stephen's work incorporates Western and African techniques, blending figurative painting and drawing with resist dyeing, weaving, and wood carving. Each image is a marriage between the aesthetic perspective and the artistry of both traditions. As a Black American trained in West African art forms, he treats the act of weaving, dyeing, and wood carving as ritualized acts of reclamation. He uses traditional techniques and materials to reclaim the ancestry of his West African roots. Queen Allotey-Pappoe Allotey-Pappoe is a Ghanaian-born fashion designer behind the brand Queen Allotey. Queen self-describes herself as a storyteller. Queen is one of the most joyful people I have ever met. Like many, I am in awe when I watch her sell her beautiful clothing in Lowell. Her personality is contagious. Her story draws from her cross-cultural experience of living in Ghana, England, and Massachusetts. Queen blends the vibrant culture of her heritage with commitment to sustainability. Her designs incorporate Ghanaian cloth with techniques of slow, ethical, contemporary fashion design. Queen studied fashion design at Mass Art. With that, I'd like to welcome, actually, first I'd like to welcome all of my speakers to come and poke their heads on for a moment. Can I have Queen and Bukola and Stephen? Queen? Oh, okay. Hi, I just wanted you all to poke your heads on so that people could see you right away. So the order that we're going to be going in is that first I'd like to have Bukola take the stage. So if the rest of us can just turn our videos and our mics off, and we'll give Bukola this. Bukola, I think you want to, okay, you got it.
Yeah. Hello, everyone. Apologies, I'm all nerves. I'm really honored to be in conversation with Karen Hampton, who brought us all together today, and Stephen Hamilton and Queen Allotey. Thank you all for having me. I would also like to acknowledge that I'm speaking to you today from the traditional indigenous homelands of the Kalapuya people, whose descendants continue to make important contributions in their communities across the land we now refer to as Oregon. My name is Bukoka Koiki, and I exist in liminal space across many identities as a Nigerian American Muslim woman, a descendant of the ancient Yoruba peoples of Western Africa and Sub-Saharan Africa. I immigrated to the United States as a teenager, and I went to college to complete a BFA in communication design, a more commercial art that I could explain to my African parents and they would understand. Later, before and during my MFA in applied craft and design, I eventually found that my true interest lay in the realm of craft, especially the history of textile arts and the artisans of West Africa. Today, I'll be showing you a few images from 3 select works in my practice thus far, and talking you through the ideas I was exploring in each project. This work is I Claim That Which Was Never Mine, which was an idea ignited by my sister's then impending wedding in 2014, and my panic that I didn't know how to tie a gele, a style of elaborate head tie worn by the traditional Yoruba garments for celebratory occasions. From that fear was born an exploration of a question: can cultural hybrids like myself, experiencing displacement and dislocation, claim a piece of the culture of their birth through the act of making? Specifically, could I perform this kind of cultural osmosis through the repetition inherent in tying a head tie repeatedly, trying to absorb this informal rite of passage to Yoruba womanhood that I was unable to learn at the feet of my mother? To that end, I chose to document myself in video, learning to tie the perfect gele or head tie for several sessions, and to explore the feeling of it, just further explore the feeling of dislocation, I created surrogate facsimiles of the original head ties out of Tyvek and canvas, using experimental techniques in resist dyeing and image transfer, which are the pieces, 3 pieces you see here. These finished head tie objects and the video, which played in a loop, were made to be shown together. The video itself splices together a few of these attempts and reveals the futility in my attempts at claiming this cultural experience, which is a rite of passage that I never experienced and thus was never mine to begin with. I'm gonna show you just under a minute of the beginning of the video performance. I look so much like my mother there, and I didn't clock that I'm wearing exactly the same sweater. Moving on, this piece is an aggregate of power, 1. This was created for a paper making residency I had in Portland, Oregon. And while I learned to make paper, I was drawn to sculptural possibilities and the fact that paper pulp takes color very well. This became an opportunity to merge my research interests in Yoruba bead making and beadwork, which is high art amongst the Yoruba and is mostly used for decoration for royal objects, thrones, crowns, etc. And this became an opportunity to merge my research interests in Yoruba bead making and beadwork with an exploration of emotional and psychological symbology of colors within the Yoruba's cultural aesthetics. To Yoruba people of southwestern Nigeria, the bead is a potent cultural object that represents healing, unity, solidarity, desire, generation and regeneration, preciousness, and auspiciousness. Beading is a serial process enacted one by one to create a unique totality. And the Yoruba speak of the body itself as a string that is threaded with pierced forms. So worn encircling your head, your neck, your wrists, your waist, and your ankles, beads literally and symbolically seal in and protect the inner spiritual essence of people and things. The word bead, because I'm kind of a linguistic nerd, the word bead is from the Old English beadi, meaning prayer. So to me, the act of beading is the act of gathering prayers, a magical aggregate of charged objects. By removing beads from the intimate physical space of the body and increasing their size many times over, I sought to transfer their power to public physical space that they occupy and to all who entered the space. I wanted to point out specifically that the paper was actually dyed after the fact, which is what gives these beads sort of a rough texture, and they're dyed using hibiscus, marigold, indigo natural dyes. Next is current work of a bit of research that I've been doing since 2008. And it was based on research I conducted on the Nigeria Handbook, which is a text that I discovered through the Smithsonian Libraries online. And it's a text printed by the British colonial administration of Nigeria in the early 1920s, cataloging the country's natural resources and encouraging the colonial plunder of West Africa's resources, basically, by British governments, banks, and trade companies. The first section of these handbooks contain advertisements from these various marauding entities, and with the following pages containing facts about the various regions and peoples, tables of crops, yields, etc. Later editions included racist and clinical native type photographic plates, like you see here on the right, and other images illustrated everything from farming methods in Nigeria to uniform styles of Nigerians that were conscripted into the colonial British Army. Further research found that the binding, and these are examples, apologies, these are examples of some of the advertising pages. What was interesting to me was several of these pages contained advertisements that featured corporations that we're very familiar with now, as well as things that you can imagine, tropical clothing for the time, and guns, racist caricatures. Working through this book is very charged and not easy at all. Further research found that the binding of these colonial texts was likely delegated to Nigerian people as well, a conclusion that I extrapolated from these images you see, which are archival images from the British archives, which show Nigerians setting type for printing presses and seated at bookbinding looms. Having studied bookbinding myself, these images struck such a nerve and were so powerful to me because they seem to be evidence that Nigerians were forced to bind the words of their oppressors into objects of power. And I can only imagine what that is like. So these series of calligraph prints that I created in response to these readings from these texts applies material signifiers of colonialism from the book and from other evidence from the time that I've since harvested and taken samples of from the British archives in London. So here I've used serif typography that is similar to what was used in the book, and from various historical colonial publications, cotton thread that represents, of course, a crop significant to the building of empire, and to experimental prints attempted in black carbon ink and in palm oil, then the primary agricultural crop that was exported from Nigeria by the British. And incidentally, the use of palm oil initiates critical commentary about ongoing effects of colonialism, since that very crop is one of the most politicized and significant contemporary global trade crops, and contributes to massive deforestation and wildfires and pollution, because it is now a cash crop that has replaced countless food crops in several countries the world over, including Nigeria. This first image here is one in a series of calligraphs printed from commercial window screen netting that's hand embroidered with phrases like anglo invasive species, which is the one you see here, plunder and profit, etc. And these phrases were my unfiltered, visceral, I guess you would say, marginalia. Marginalia that was born of my reading of the text within the handbook. The second text here shows one of my pieces from a second series of works inspired by the same research. This specific calligraph print appropriates the graphic design of an advertisement from the Nigeria handbook. You may have actually spotted it in one of the earlier slides. And is an advertisement for the Colonial Bank, which is now Barclays Bank, a very old British institution, kind of like Chase or one of the major banks here. And it does that as a means to amplify the obscene amounts of money devoted to the subjugation and exploitation of Nigeria's resources. Imagine if this kind of money, $10 million in 1922, I can't even imagine how much that money is, but imagine if they had chosen to use it to build instead of to destroy. The graphics of the color graph matrices are meticulously hand-stitched to provide a call back to the stolen labor of the Nigerian people. And in general, this work is still ongoing and yielding more and more ideas, but this is where it is now, and it's some of the most cerebral and interesting work of my life. Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you, Bukola. Stephen.
Hello, everyone.
Bukola, can you turn your screen off, please?
Yes, I'm doing that now.
Hello, everyone. Thank you so much, Bukola, for that amazing presentation. Thank you so much, Bukola, for that amazing presentation. My work is exploring traditional weaving and dyeing traditions from West Africa as an act of reclamation, specifically as an African American. The work that I do sort of all stemmed from a very life-changing experience I had at the Nikkei Centers for Art and Culture in Nigeria, mainly in Osogbo and Ogidi-Ijumu. So these examples here are examples of hand-woven and hand-dyed textiles using natural dyes, all using techniques that I learned either through research or through study at the Nikkei Center for Art and Culture. A lot of the work that I do explores traditional handicraft and traditional art forms, mainly weaving and dyeing. It's an exploration of these traditions which are native to Southern Nigeria. These forms of traditional hand weaving and traditional dyeing are very important to the commercial and the spiritual history of West Africa. And also of the African diaspora. So a lot of the work talks about the reclamation of indigo dyeing, the reclamation of working with cotton, the reclamation of working with these different textile arts as an African American, also to sort of recover and explore these narratives. So like I said, my understanding of these traditional art forms are due to my study at the Nikkei Center for Art and Culture. So I always try to thank the teachers who provided me with this information. So when I was living in Ogidi-Ijumu, my teacher was Miss Agnes Umeche. She is a weaver and dyer of the Igbira people. Her family has been weaving for centuries. In the town of Okene, which is also located in Kogi State. Like many women in her family, she learned the art of weaving from the time when she was very young. And the textiles that they were weaving brought a lot of not only commercial wealth, but also social and cultural wealth. The textiles that they were created were exported all throughout Nigeria and also formed the basis of ritual and socially important textiles in the region. You know, her being my teacher, I was thinking a lot about the importance of these textiles as like these sort of ritual textiles, these art forms as these ritualized art forms, and the importance that they have in the culture of Nigeria, specifically amongst the Yoruba people and their neighbors, their Igbo, Edo, and Igbira neighbors. So again, this art form sort of places itself at the cornerstone of a lot of the work that I do. A lot of the work I do incorporates this traditional weaving technique as well as adire, so traditional dyeing with indigo dyes, traditional tie, stitch, and wax resist dyeing, and then incorporating that into my own sort of series of narrative storytelling through illustration. My background, again, being a painter. You can see some examples of the textiles that I had the opportunity to create while I was in Nigeria, specifically in the town of Ogidi Ijumu. So as I said before, as an African American whose ancestors were forced to work cash crops in the United States, while I was there, I was very much thinking about the importance of these textile traditions and these materials in the cultures of West Africa. So in addition to learning these techniques, I was also learning about the histories of the towns that I was living in, and also the traditional religion of the Yoruba people. Through that study, I was exploring the relationship between cotton and indigo with these narratives and also with this heritage. So, you know, again, these items cannot be removed from the spiritual and historical significance that they hold in these cultures. For example, Osogbo was founded by hunters that were fleeing drought. And then they came upon Oshun, who is the goddess of the Oshun River that crosses through Osogbo. Oshun was a dyer in the forest. So that associates Osogbo with the art of dyeing even before the foundation of the town. So the relationship with indigo, with the spiritual center of that town, with Oshun, who's the goddess of that town, who is also and a very important figure in the spiritual fabric of that place, shows the importance of indigo as a substance, not only for commercial wealth, for the women who are indigo dyers, for the women who work with indigo, but also to this metaphysical world, this connection to this spiritual and this spiritual unseen world. So taking all of that into consideration and thinking about my work as a narrative storyteller, as an illustrator, I began to find ways to think about ways in which I can incorporate this material with these narratives that I was learning, with these histories that I was learning. So what came out of that was a series of portraits of people who I had the honor of working with and living with when I was in Nigeria, people who are artists, people who are also part of the spiritual fabric of the towns that I was in. I'm using these materials as the surface. So thinking about kijipa, which is hand-woven cotton fabric, which is made from hand-spun cloth, and sort of recreating these very ancient forms of adire, which use hand-spun cotton, hand-woven cotton cloth, and painting portraits of people from these different regions that I was in, people who I had the opportunity to know, and also incorporating these elements of Yoruba religious life, these elements in Yoruba philosophy and Yoruba mythology, you know, thinking about how these materials can sort of help push those narratives. So these again are all, this is, I'm a friend of mine, Yakubu, who's a native of Ogidi, Chief Nika Ekundai Davies, who, in addition to being one of an amazing resource for me and allowing me to study at her centers, was also just a wealth of knowledge. And also the Olori of Ogidi, the first wife of the king of Ogidi, who herself is an Alaro, who is herself an indigo dyer. So a lot of my work also talks about the reclamation of this art form, not only for myself, but also for people in my community. So when I returned to the United States, I developed a program called Stitch into Memory, where I was teaching traditional weaving and dyeing to Boston youth. So I was teaching young people how to use the ofi, the upright loom, the upright women's loom, and also teaching them different forms of adire. So you can see two of my former students, Jordan and Lewis, weaving on a small ofi made from old pallets, and Miss Falilat, who was one of the weavers in Ogidi Ijumu. So again, a lot of my practice as an educator is about teaching the significance of these art forms to young people of African descent, and also finding ways in which we can reclaim these art forms, which were very much exploited and also dissociated from us in the African diaspora. So thinking about the idea of people from regions that cultivated indigo, from regions that cultivated cotton, their skills in processing and cultivating indigo and cotton being taken to the Americas and forced to produce and process these crops to support the white supremacist, like colonial enterprise, imperialist enterprise. What does it look like for us to reclaim these materials and these art forms? So this is an installation which was actually created by my students who I taught these art forms to. And again, as a storyteller, I think a lot about how these narratives are pushed forward. So thinking about ways in which I can incorporate narrative storytelling and traditional textile artwork to textile work to tell these stories. So this is from a graphic novel that incorporated Adire, talking about Oshun, talking about the creation of the world. A story from Oshitura, which is part of the Ifa divinatory corpus, all incorporating traditional West African art forms, wood carving, weaving, and dyeing, taken literally from Yoruba oral literature. This is the Founders Project, which reimagined Boston Public School high school students as the legendary progenitors of West and West Central African ethnic groups. So again, incorporating the traditional textile arts of different regions of West Africa and portraiture and wood carving. I had the opportunity to, in addition to weaving and dyeing myself, also hiring young people who I taught weaving and dyeing to act as studio assistants for this project, while also engaging young people in conversations about Africa while selecting them for the modeling process. So this is Janae. This is Janae Wyatt as Queen Poku of the Baule people. And she's painted on hand-woven, hand-dyed cloth inspired by Baule textiles. So again, the references of these traditional African textile arts and art forms and histories sort of reinforce the narrative portion of the work. So in this image of Sunjata Keita, the founder of the Mali Empire, and Yanenga, the founder of the Masi Empire, you see these visual cues and you see these references from African artifacts and African art history being painted directly on reproductions of textiles from that region. So incorporating these traditional art forms as a way to educate about these artistic traditions, as well as inform people about the narratives. So again, my work as an artist and as a dyer is very much based off of like these elements of research, learning about these art forms, learning about their cultural significance in African and Afro-American context, but also this research through doing. So this research through making and creating. And through that, it becomes a way in which I explore, this act of reclamation, this very spiritual act of creation, with this sort of academic way of looking at textiles, looking at the history of textiles, exploring the nature of their manufacture. And again, this process encourages different elements of collaboration and interdisciplinary artwork. So you can see incorporating illustration, collaborating with photographers. This was actually a photograph by my cousin, Stacey Hamilton, and also engaging the community. So this was part of a series of work, an ongoing series of work exploring gendered power in West Africa, exploring the fluidity and complexity of gendered power in West Africa. So this is Shalon Lomax. I'm wearing textiles and clothing that I've made, exploring this idea of the divine mothers and the power of the divine mothers in Yoruba and also other Nigerian cultures. So again, the work is part research, part community collaboration, part textile work, part painting, part illustration, thinking about ways in which all of these worlds can sort of like be in communication with each other. And this is again part of that same photo series.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Queen.
Hi. Hello, everybody. Thank you so much for giving me this opportunity to share my work and also to be a part of this conversation. My name is Queen Allotey-Pappoe, and I am the creator behind the brand Queen Allotey-Pappoe. Bear with me a second, I'm trying to pull this up. Okay. Can you see my screen now?
Yes, but can you put it on presentation mode?
Yes, please bear with me. Okay. Right. So like Karen did introduce me, I am originally from Ghana. I was born and bred in Ghana. Lived most of my elementary life in Ghana, and then I moved to England to further my education. Lived there for a while, worked, and then moved here to Boston through marriage. I got married and moved here. And in the course of my travels and just my short time on earth, it did bear on me greatly that the art and craft of my people, which is the African people, kind of had a place. It still hadn't found its place in the world, especially in this modern textile world. And I found that very troubling. And so I was obviously on a different trajectory, working in a different capacity, but I'd always been from a family of textile purveyors, textile designers. My grandmother sewed almost all our clothing. And so I literally lived with textiles, like it was ingrained in me, and I would always style folks. And so once I came to that place where I decided that this was just beyond just styling people, and it was a voice that I needed to be represented. I decided to go to school to mass art here in Boston to get the technical know-how to construct clothing. Now, like I said, I express my art through my clothing brand, which is Queen Allotey, and basically I just create wearable art that is inspired by the joy of living, and also celebrating the rich pattern and color of African textiles, both traditional and the modern digitally rendered textiles as well. Each piece is one of a kind, handmade, highly functional statement pieces that are designed for the women on the go. Now, what really brought me to this was this idea, and which I found very strange, because in my mind, anytime I saw the working woman back home in Ghana, whether in the office or at home, they were always adorned, like they were in the brightest of colors. They were always in a gear that was a statement piece. And having traveled, seeing much of the opposite, I just couldn't connect the two. My favorite scene from back home was always at the market scene, where all these market women will be in like very interesting fibers and colors and interesting functions, and they would still be working very hard under the sun. And so I thought to myself, if I want to present a part of myself to this metrocultural world I am in, I want to bring that kind of vibrancy, that kind of life, that kind of joy that can only be felt by expressing yourself through clothing. And so I birthed Queen Allotey, which was just a way for women to express themselves through color, through the textiles, through the rich patterns of all the textiles that come back from Africa. Now, most of the time when I looked on the world scene, I realized that most of the textiles that had been presented has always been the textiles from our past, which is wonderful because those are our traditional fibers. They are traditional textiles that belong to our heritage. But I also wanted to present a new viewpoint of what is going on the continent now, and the fact that our artwork and all our textiles and all the craftsmanship which our ancestors had worked hard at to preserve had in a way been metamorphosed into new digital prints, which in a way, as a form of resistance and resilience, the people back home in Ghana and some the other parts of Africa had made their own still. So you still had the traditional block print makers who were making pieces with like adire, the tie-dyed hand printed pieces, and then you had new on the market digitally printed textiles from some of the national textile mill companies that were existing side by side. So my viewpoint was to bring all these cumulative textiles onto the global scene and to design these pieces for metroculturals, people that are open to the notion, the idea that we live in a global world where there's room for every culture and where there's room for every heritage, where we can all live side by side and give each and every heritage a stage on the platform which was fashion. I found this very necessary because this voice was not amplified. The fashion industry has always been guilty of not amplifying certain voices or just relegating certain voices to just that of costume or just pieces that are reserved for special occasions. And I wanted to change that narrative that textiles from back home could also be incorporated into everyday wear and also be as functional as we could. So moving on, for example, this piece I had actually designed for a costume for, interestingly enough, Leonard Bernstein's Candide production, and this was Kunidad's dress in the glitter and beguine scene. And I thought, wouldn't it be interesting to repurpose these fabrics? So the skirt she is in is repurposed from a reclaimed drapes, but then I wanted to fashion it in the traditional cabine slit, which is like the skirt that we wear back home in Ghana. Most West African skirts would have like a very tightly fit skirt, and then it will have the flare, and I wanted to play with this silhouette. And so this was a fitted skirt with a little flounce just above the knee for this woman to be able to still go about her everyday business. And one of the things that really inspired me as an artist is the power of the working woman, whether she's at home or she is out in the world juggling roles. And this idea that she could be dressed up to express herself and still be able to go out there and juggle all those roles is my offering to my customers, that you don't need to be in beige, you don't need to be in black all the time, you don't need to be in gray all the time. You can still go out there and accomplish much, just like the market women back home in Ghana, juggling all different roles, but still adorned and expressing themselves and having some fun doing that. The other thing,
excuse me,
yes.
I think your slides are not advancing.
Oh, okay, sorry.
If you can Yeah, we're only seeing slide number 2.
Oh, really? Sorry about
Yeah.
that. Oh, okay. Hold on. Is it showing now?
No, we're still only seeing slide number 2.
Okay. Bear with me a second. Is it showing now?
No. Jane or Bianca, do you have any ideas?
Let me stop it
So-
and put it back on.
Yeah, Queen, you might be presenting your slideshow in another window that wasn't being shared. You know what I mean? Like sometimes when you're in presentation mode, if you hit presentation mode,
All right. Let me do that again.
yeah.
Sorry about that, folks.
No worries.
Okay. Well, is it showing now?
No, you need to share again. Okay, so now you're sharing, but we don't see anything. Now we're seeing, now we see.
Okay. All right. Let me just start from where I was caught up.
Okay,
Yeah.
okay, so now you can just run through them if you'd like.
Can you see it now?
Yes. Yes.
Okay. All right. Sorry about that, folks. Now, the other part of my work is also just encouraging folks to be experimental with their clothing. A big piece of the foundation of my work is sustainability, and this notion that we are just stewards of the earth, and that we do not have the permission to deplete the resources that we've been loaned in lieu for the future generations. And one way I bring that message is making pieces that are timeless and encouraging my customers and the wearers of my clothing to find ways to express themselves with the same piece. So for example, in this slide where I have a simple scarf which we use back home, which creatively women can play and make all sorts of things with, I encourage my customers who come to the studio, teach them how to use it as a headscarf like we do back home, to wrap the head. That same piece, it becomes a versatile piece that becomes a neck scarf to express how you're feeling, to express yourself. That same piece can become a sash around the waist. And it's just a way of transferring that value that I was taught from way back as a child, that every resource is very precious, and that it should be, the value of that resource should be maximized and not used and discarded easily like we do today's fast fashion. And so part of my work is just bringing people through these textiles, bringing people to that conscience of being responsible to the traditions and to the resources that we've been left with. And another powerful part of my work is also using the motifs from the traditional textiles from back home in conveying messages and sharing that with my customers. Like for example, this blueprint we see here with the bed, it's literally back home, it's called Sikawan Taban. And literally what that means is money has wings, it can fly. And so this very simple motif, sharing that idea that money has wings, it can do good things, it can go to places and solve problems. And that same money can also be depleted if it's not taken care of. So I share that oral tradition of storytelling through clothing, through my work with the textiles from back home. And I think that is a very powerful thing to share, especially in this metrocultural world we are living in. And that opens up to diversity as well. Now, this piece is a work, this woven blue piece dress. It's a dress I titled Midnight Dreams, and it incorporates the traditional technique of hair braiding. So this whole piece where you see the model with her daughter, it's woven synthetic hair. I wanted to mimic the craftsmanship of hair braiders back home in Ghana, and how much care is taken in grooming the self. And so this whole piece is made from synthetic hair, but then every piece you see in the bustier, there is singly braided hair strips that I did hand stitched together on the craft foam, and then I crafted the bustier and then braided the skirt as well. And so this was a piece that was celebrating the craftsmanship of the workers back home. Now, for this last piece is made from a wax printed cotton as well. And this is a steel corseted gown. The really cool thing about this piece is it's 100% biodegradable, because that's very important to me, that my pieces, if they found themselves in the earth, like most of our clothing are being buried, will become one with the earth. And so this is one of the highlights of my work. I wanted to show how my past, which is my traditional African past of block printed fabric, has been transitioned into a digital print, and then it finds itself being made into a European corseted gown that finds all these worlds come together in making this dress, and this representing that metrocultural world that I envision we would all live in, and be able to have room side by side for all the pieces that would come from all over the world to exist on the same stage by each other. And so that in itself, when I see this piece out here, I feel like a part of my work here, and hopefully it will find itself being represented, so that textiles coming from other places would also find a voice, or would find a place, especially on the fashion scene in the Western world. Thank you.
Thank you, Queen. Can I have all the speakers come turn your cameras on now, and we'll have a little bit of discussion. This is to the audience. If you have any questions, if you'd please put them in the Q&A, we'll be able to see them and I can direct the questions. Bukola?
Sorry, I'm trying. It says that the host has stopped my video.
Oh. Okay. Nice to see you all. That was wonderful. Thank you so much. Thank you so much for, this is like my dream. In having all of you here and speaking, having the perspective from the Bukola, and coming from a Nigerian root, and then the interpretation and the understanding of self. This is me speaking. The understanding of self within culture, and having Queen, who is Ghanaian, having that the joy and the feeling of life, my interpretation, your childhood in Ghana, and the beauty and the representation and the strength and the power that women in the marketplace carry, and how you transition that to the United States. And then having Stephen, who is American, who has gone and followed his roots to understand himself and the world in a better place. It just thrills me. We're we're kind of short on time, so I'm just going to try to first off ask, are there any cross conversations that you would like to have?
I think I just want to say that it's just an honor to be here with all of you. It's a beautiful thing to just see like how the work is in all of our works are in conversations with each other in different ways. I love like the last slide that you showed, Bukola, that's talking about like this history of colonial exploitation and all of these resources, which is sort of after like, okay, these are these interpretations of these old art forms, the beads, you know, the textiles, all of these items that are important culturally to Yoruba people. And then also this colonial legacy of like division and also exploitation of these resources and these people, which is still happening now. Like we're feeling that right now, still, unfortunately. And then with you, Queen, like, you know, I think it's very interesting, and I love the fact that you said it's like this, you know, when we're thinking about these wax print textiles and these new textiles, these may not be traditional handmade textiles, but, you know, the question is who is using them? So you as an African woman who's using these textiles, who has a relationship with these textiles, that's also an act of reclamation. You know, that's also this act of like, you know, this is something that's a part of my culture that I'm moving forward. And it just made me think about these in a different way, in a very interesting way. So I thank you all for like talking about this and sharing your very beautiful work.
Thank you, Stephen.
I wanted to say something, you know, that I think one thing that's really important about Queen's work is that Queen is working with the generation of cloth that are not the Dutch wax prints, that are not the Chinese cloth, but they are the prints that are coming out of Africa.
Africa, yeah.
And that's a really important point to make, that it's been an entire evolution from that point when the Dutch were first, you know, through their colonial power going in. And, you know, and I really want to say, in my own opinion, I believe that the fashion world coming out of West Africa and South Africa is just some of the most beautiful work in the country. I mean, in the world at this point. Bukola, I love your way of telling history and exploring history. I absolutely, those are the things that are the heart to me of, you know, my driving force in my own work, is to come to the point of understanding myself and the things that are the objects of life, the things that we accept as our life, in our life and every day, that are these objects, and the power that they all share.
Yeah.
Sorry, go ahead.
No, I was just going to say thank you, Karen, again for bringing us all together. Like for this is it's just so fascinating to see everyone's work, and Queen's work is new to me, and Stephen, I've been stalking his Instagram for a bit. So this is actually really wonderful, and I think, you know, to sort of take the same tack as Stephen did, like one of the things that I really loved hearing about Queen's work, for instance, is that her incorporation of, as you mentioned, like direct from African factories, and also handmade textiles in her work, because there is that long history of African textiles not actually being African.
Exactly.
And so this is really sort of fascinating to see that. And then I also appreciated your use of the hair braiding technique, because my bead object, actually the cord uses the irukiko, which is the hair
tail
technique as well. So this is how, you know, you can use sort of elements of like lived experience and
Mhm.
adornment, etc., you know, as part of your work as well. And then in Stephen's work, Stephen's work moves me so much. And as I've been stalking his Instagram for a while,
Yes.
but I first asked him because I first talked to him because I found out that he had learned from Nikkei Art Center. And what is so ironic and interesting and really beautiful about that is to find someone who, like, you know, when you're growing up in Nigeria, and my mother actually had tailoring shops and
Yes.
worked with textiles, etc. But we were very much pushed towards like
The
Western
West.
education. And
Yes.
while I showed interest, I was never given a chance to sort of learn from
Mhm.
her in that way. So coming to textiles, the use of it, knowing how to sew, all of that came secondary. Although I always had an appreciation for adire and all of those other things. And so to find someone who is, you know, the descendant of enslaved peoples here in Americas who went back to Nigeria, in Ogidi, and actually sort of took the time to sort of learn those things. I mean, it's sort of really moving that I was there and I lived there, but I was never given a chance to learn. But for this person to like uproot their life and go back and sort of learn again, sort of at the feet of his mothers,
Mm.
as it were,
Yeah.
it's so beautiful.
Mhm.
So yeah, I really appreciate this conversation and the sort of cross cultural and sort of insight that I'm finding with like our different works. Yeah.
It's interesting, Bukola, when you started the video of trying to tie the gele, I just started smiling because it's always like the centerpiece of conversation in my studio. Like people come in and the first thing is, can you teach me how to tie this? I'm like, of course, let's do this. And at the end of the day, the interesting thing is now they wonder, like, where does this fit in today's world? Like, am I appropriating culture if I go out in a headscarf that is not my own? And even for people of color like us who didn't grow up back home, they would come in and say, can you teach me how to do this? And I would teach them. And then they're like, but I don't know if it feels right to just come out, not coming from a place where this has been like my way of dressing. And I would explain to them that yes, it has a place in here, because if Chinese silk can have place here in America, if Italian wool can have place here in America, then obviously African textiles have a place in this metrocultural world we live in. It's a presentation that we are also bringing to the world, and for our culture or for that heritage to also be on that same pedestal as the rest. So long as you can explain and be able to offer that heritage, then it does have a place in today's context. And so I think we need to, I'm sure by now you have perfected the gele, but we might need to do some more sessions.
Yes, definitely need more sessions. My mother is not impressed.
Oh my goodness, no, that I'm sure they will never be impressed till the day we die, because there will always be a way they want it tied. So no, that we cannot win.
Let's see, we have a couple questions in the Q&A. This is from Eliaton Valerie. Do you have any information about being able to study textiles in West Africa? Perhaps non-academic possibility. Is there a way to be in touch with the panelists? And we're gonna answer it live.
So I think for me, when I learned at the Nikkei Center for Art and Culture, I know that that's not always the most accessible thing to do, like especially now what's happening in Nigeria, that's like not like as much of a feasible thing to do. I think what was really like, what I feel grateful for is I was able to live there, and I was able to give my money to a teacher there and be able to live and be immersed in that space and to learn those art forms in that space. And I do think that one of the things that I'm encouraging people to do, especially if people are part of institutions who have a lot of money who are listening to this,
Yes.
there are amazing artisans who are in West Africa who are doing incredible work. And like, it's one thing to collect textiles from 200 years ago or 100 years ago, as opposed to empower people who are making those textiles now. So I think it would be really awesome for people to connect these artisans in West Africa who are textile artists here and to bring them to America to do that work. Nike Okundayi's first experience like in textile work was with Haystacks. Somebody from Haystacks brought her and Twin 77 over. And one of the workshops was teaching for everybody, but then she also did a special workshop specifically for African Americans teaching the upright loom. For me, I think that also, like for me, I'm very, and this is me being very honest, I'm very particular about like who I run workshops for, especially the weekly workshops, because they are free. But I also like try to have, you know, some talks and some workshops that are available free online as well. Talking about talking about the history of these textiles that are like on IG Live and things like that. So if you ever wanted to keep in touch with me, my Instagram is @theartofstephenhamilton. And I have resources that are there, and also try to put out other resources there.
I would second that as well, about bringing artisans from West Africa in. If you are part of the institution, it's something to bend their ear about. I think that especially with seeing fashion designers like Kenneth Eze using ashoke, which is sort of highland cloth from the Yoruba peoples, and people like Busayo NYC, who uses sort of modern wax resist tie-dye in her work, etc. These are all working artists and fashion designers today who are seeking out artisans back home instead of relying on just Western textiles. So it's important that we all take that initiative and seek out something beyond our everyday. It's harder now in the pandemic, but these people exist there and out there and have much to offer.
Yeah.
Do you want to put your Instagram handles in the chat?
Sure.
That would be a way for people to be in touch with you.
Okay.
And Queen, you put, okay, good.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. Well, I think we are out of time now.
Oh.
I'm so sad to have to end this. Maybe the beginning of many more conversations. You know, I think so highly of all three of you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, Karen.
Thank you so much for having us, Karen.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you, Karen. Thank you all for attending this as well.
Yeah, thank you, everyone, for being here.
Bye.
Bye. Karen, do you want us to stay or sign off?
We can stay for a minute. Let's see if the participants start going down.
Okay.